On Her Way, a podcast about grief and loss. Beryl Botman is my name. I am a widow. I'm the widow of Russell Botman. My husband died suddenly. I didn't expect it. It put me on a path of grief and loss for which I was absolutely not prepared. I am the mother of 2 daughters and 2 stepchildren. I'm a grandmother. My whole world fell apart at the time of dealing with this grief and this new path that I had to walk. I was also a PhD candidate and I had to do that and complete my studies at the same time. But about this grief and loss, this way that I've walked, it took me 5 years to walk this way, to walk this path, to start writing about this process. And this writing process culminated in publications, 2 books. Without You is the beginning or the first book of this writing process. And the second is Still Love Remains. In the books, I tried to relate events and thoughts as they happened. And it was amazing how I could retell the story after 5 years because I was actually surprised about my memory. In the books, I tried to relate these events as real events. I set out to be honest with myself in the way I was telling my story. My story as it happened and as I see it, as was my reflection and my opinion about the grief and loss of my husband and partner, my pastor and friend. Telling my story, I was not trying to interpret my story. I was not trying to make sense of it really. I was just saying what I was feeling and relating events, how that happened, not interpreting them. This podcast, in these different episodes, I am reflecting on how I saw the story unfolding as I told it in these 2 books. And so the podcasts are reflections that are based on these books. So I will be more interpreting and also relating to you what others, readers and other people who interacted me about these books, what they have said. Initiating this podcast is some attempt in interpreting my storytelling and broadening the discussion on the different topics raised in the books. I named episode 1, this episode, The Shock Death Brings. I identify the shock facing sudden death of Russell Botman, my life partner, as being mainly psychological shock, initially. And in thinking and reflecting about this, I reread what I've written about my first steps, my first moment, the moment where I discovered, because that is what happened, I discovered that he has died. I reflect on them as moments where I actually didn't know what I was doing, but I remember every single feeling, every single word, every single thought, and every moment, every step I took during those few moments. And I wrote about it as I remembered it after the 5-year period. One of the people in one of the book launches in Gqeberha in South Africa, Professor Veonna Goliath responded to the reading of both my books. She is professor in the Department of Social Development Professions at Nelson Mandela University in Gqeberha. And this book launch was in March 2024. And I would like to share what she had to say, how she reflected on what she read about those moments of shock. As you share your story, your first instinct was to get to Mediclinic upon thinking that your husband might have passed. You didn't phone anyone, and there was no regard for self. You did not call to anyone to come and rescue you. Your head jumped into action to get help for your husband. You described the frantic running outside the clinic, trying to get through a clearly locked door with chain on, shaking the door. You were devoid of logic. This characterized the shock and confusion. You hit many blanks, forgetting familiar details, floundering tidal waves, shattering against a rudderless ship. But you remained in headspace to get the help needed to confirm your greatest fear of your husband not being alive anymore. The fact that you also drove yourself to the clinic and back home, despite the nurses trying to convince you otherwise, with this headstrong determination, you drove yourself back. Logic prevailed that you had to let them into your house, staying in sober mind, against the dichotomy of the confusion you were experiencing. Only once Russell's death is confirmed do you reach out to your sister Veronica. And as you go through the tasks and phases of grief. Close quote. So Veonna Goliath reflected on certain aspects, and it was for me quite a discovery, revealing in the way she has read my book, my story, and how she reflected on it. And so I'm very privileged to share that with you. Beyond that, I also did some of my own reflections in preparation for these podcasts. I related the events focused on my initial observations in the situation I found myself in. Initially, I didn't recognize the obvious. I didn't recognize that I saw my husband after his death. I thought he was still alive. It took me 3 visits, 3 occasions to recognize that he has died. And in that time, it was about an hour and a half. I went on my merry way with all the activities that I did. I was watching TV, I was making coffee and fetching newspapers until the realization of his death hit home. There was a sudden surge of adrenaline. I was feeling jittery. I couldn't stand still. I couldn't think straight. I acted strangely, but I gave myself time in whatever I was doing, walking up and down the stairs, thinking what next. I gave myself time to start thinking somewhat rationally on what to do. So I could not myself recognize that I was in shock, thinking about the state of shock that I am in. I didn't think of myself as being in shock, but others do. Yes, so I didn't recognize that I was in a state of shock, but of course the nursing sister did. And she recommended that I stay, but I knew I couldn't. But I also knew that I had to manage my actions in the meantime. They did treat me for the shock and I went home. So I had to listen to the instructions of others and I had to act upon it. This doesn't come automatically, but I managed to do that. When I think of the actions that I have done, I wouldn't have planned it in that way. In fact, I never ever thought that I would have to be thinking ahead of relating to such a sudden shock. I've had other shocks in my life. My mother passed away suddenly in her sleep. Hearing about that was also a shock, but to date, as far as my life goes, this was the ultimate biggest shock ever. So these are the symptoms that I portrayed during my period of shock. But there are other people who have other symptoms. I even might not have been aware of these symptoms, but I cannot relate symptoms that I'm not aware of. I didn't, for example, experience an out of body experience. I was present. I knew that what was happening. I understood what was happening. I just couldn't act in a way that I could recognize within myself. Another symptom is that one's chest draws tight, or you experience intense anger and start screaming and yelling. That is not the way I reacted. Other symptoms for people in shock is that they can run away. They run down the street or get into their car and drive off to any unknown place. That is not the symptoms I experienced. Other people could also hyperventilate. This is when you're feeling spacey, you feel out of it, you feel foggy. All these symptoms are part of what the experts call flight, fight, or freeze responses. And so I responded in a way that I think, now that I'm reflecting on it, is true to my character. I can be faced with the most extreme shock and I will stand firm on my feet. I might not know exactly what to do, but I will not run away. I will face it and I will deal with it, and I will make do with the capacity that I have and act upon it. Now, when one goes through shock, I realize upon reflecting that your body prepares you to act fast in a way that is actually thoughtless. You can't think things through, not in a logical way anyway, but your body reacts in a way that the body is used to, and that the body is trained, and the body knows this is what Beryl will do when she is in this state. And what I did, I realized what I did was that I gave my body a chance to take over and gave my body a chance to prompt me in the ways that I would feel comfortable and I would know in dealing with this in such a unknown way, such a strange way, something that is not common to my everyday life. And what in fact happens with one's body when you are in shock is that your body automatically will return to normal so that you can focus. You don't have to think, how am I going to get out of the shock? How am I going to act? For example, I didn't know how to use my cell phone. I couldn't find the number of my doctor or Russell's doctor. I looked at my cell phone and I didn't know what to do with it. But that was in the time of shock. And my body got used to it and my body automatically returned to normal, and then I could sit down and take a deep breath and I could call my sister. The shock that death brings can present many symptoms within the way that your body tells you to react to shock in a characteristic way that your body responds to. And now I would like to share an extract from my book, Without You, the first book about this moment of shock. I'm reading from page 11. I halt in the doorway. You are lying in the same position as I left you much earlier this morning. Exactly the same. It's a wonder I didn't drop the coffee. I rushed to put the cups down on the pedestal on my side of the bed, and I look at your face. I say aloud, but you are dead. It's way too soon, I think. Thank you, Lord, for delivering him. I pray. Your body is resting on your side of the bed. You are lying on your left side with your back to the window, your head resting on my pillow. Just the one. Both hands are clenched in fists supporting your head. Your eyes are closed, your mouth open. It looks like you are only sleeping, peaceful as always. I know you are dead, but I have to make sure. I call your name aloud 3 or 4 times. Should I shake you? I shake you and call again. Your right fist comes loose and moves slightly away from your face, stiff as a poker. What do I do now? I run down the stairs, up again, looking at you. What must I do now? I run up and down the stairs. I need to call a doctor. I walk to your side of the bed and pick up your phone, trying to remember your doctor's name. I can't remember. My fingers won't move. Cell phone in hand, I race down the stairs, up again, stare at your phone. Maybe I should call my doctor. I pick up my cell phone with my left hand, but I can't remember my doctor's name either. I don't know how to search anymore. My fingers are stiff, petrified. What do I do now? This is an extract from my book. And now for our regular Reader's Corner, in which I share some thoughts that readers have shared with me. I'm going back to Professor Veonna Goliath when she relates her reflections on the books generally. I find the writing to be a delicate, sensitive and sober, thoughtful, soulful reflection, which is an intimate, authentic reflection, taking the reader along into very private space of Dr. Botman navigating the tidal waves of grief and loss at multiple levels. And then she reflects on the presentation that I've made at this book launch, and she says, as I listen to you, the work is a transformative tool that allows us to be liberated from shackles of shame and secrets that keep us quiet. Shame and guilt keep us quiet. However, I experience the author as clothed in strength and grace, the two gifts she fervently prays for since that faithful day on 28th of June 2014, when her life partner, Prof Russell Botman, is called to rest so suddenly and silently. It has taken you 5 years to write the books. 5 is grace in spiritual terms. The 5-year journey is no coincidence. It takes deep courage to speak like this and share so deeply. The words of Veonna Goliath. You've been listening to The Shock Death Brings on my podcast On Her Way with Beryl Botman. Walk tall, tell it all. You've been listening to On Her Way with Beryl Botman. You can purchase my books online on Amazon, Take-A-Lot, and at bookstores like Exclusive Books, Bargain Books, Independent Bookstores, and Barnes & Noble internationally. To connect with me, please follow me on Facebook to learn more about my book launches and talks. You can write to me at beryl.botman60@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.